Inherited $3 million on a Tuesday, and by Friday, I already knew exactly who loved me. Not because I told anyone. I didn't tell a single soul. That was the whole point. Let me back up. My name is not important right now. What matters is who I was before that Tuesday. I was 29 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus with a second-hand couch and a coffee maker that only worked if you unplugged it and plugged it back in twice. I was a junior accountant at a mid-size firm, making enough to cover rent and groceries and not much else. I clipped digital coupons. I brought lunch from home every single day in the same blue insulated bag I'd had since college. I drove a 2014 Honda Civic with a dent on the passenger side that I kept meaning to fix. My family knew all of this, and somehow, that knowledge seemed to give them permission. My mother would call every few weeks, and the first thing out of her mouth, before, "How are you?" before "I miss you," was always something like, "Have you thought about going back to school?" Accounting isn't really a career with a ceiling, you know. She'd read an article. Or she'd spoken to a friend whose daughter was in medical school. Or she'd simply had a thought at 2 in the morning and decided to let it become my problem. My older brother was worse. He was 34, worked in real estate and spoke to me the way someone speaks to a valet, pleasantly enough, but never quite looking directly at you. He had a beautiful house in Dublin, Ohio, a wife I barely knew, and 2 kids whose names I sometimes mixed up, which made Christmas uncomfortable. Whenever we were in the same room, he had a way of steering every conversation back to something he'd accomplished. A deal he'd closed, a trip he and his wife had taken, a school his son had gotten into. He never asked me questions, not real ones. And then there was my sister. Oh, my sister. She and I were only 2 years apart, which I think made it worse somehow. Close enough that people expected us to be best friends, far enough apart that we'd never quite synced up. She was 31, stayed close to home, taught second grade, and had somehow become the family favorite in a way that nobody acknowledged out loud, but everyone understood. My mother saved the good china for when my sister visited. My brother called her for advice. When she walked into a room at Thanksgiving, people turned toward her the way plants turn toward light. I loved her. I want to be clear about that. But she had a way of making me feel small that I don't think she even realized. Little comments dressed up as concern. "You look tired in that photo you posted. Are you sure you're eating enough? You look thin. I just worry about you, that's all." The worry was always the wrapper. Inside the wrapper was something else entirely. I had learned over many years to keep my expectations low. I did not call when I was struggling. I did not ask for help. I had a small, careful life, and I protected it by not needing anything from anyone in my family. So when my great-aunt Vera, my grandmother's younger sister, who I had met maybe 6 times in my entire life, passed away in February and left me $3 million, I stood in my kitchen in my socks and read the letter from the attorney 3 times before I let myself believe it. Vera had no children. She'd spent her whole life in western Pennsylvania, in a house she'd bought in 1974, driving the same Buick, keeping to herself. She had money I didn't know about, a lifetime of quiet, careful saving, plus property plus a few investments her late husband had made in the 70s that had done surprisingly well. And for reasons her attorney told me she'd explained in a separate handwritten note, a note that I have kept in a shoebox under my bed ever since, she had chosen me. The note said she'd watched our family from a distance for years. She said my grandmother, before she died, had talked about me, about how I never complained, about how I showed up, about how I was the one who drove 3 hours to visit her in the nursing home when nobody else did. Vera said she didn't have much family left that she trusted, but she trusted me, even from a distance. She said she hoped the money would give me room to breathe. I read that note and I cried for an hour. Then I called my attorney, a woman I'd found through my firm, someone sharp and no-nonsense who I'd used once before for a lease dispute, and I told her everything. She told me what to do. She told me to keep quiet until the estate cleared. She told me not to move the money anywhere visible. She told me to act normal. I acted normal. I went to work on Monday. I brought my blue lunch bag. I complained about the coffee maker to my coworker, a woman named Petra who sat 2 desks over and who had been one of the only genuinely kind people in my day-to-day life for the past 3 years. Petra knew something was going on. She told me later that I had a look on my face like someone trying very hard not to smile. But she didn't push. That was Petra. She never pushed. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my brother. I didn't tell my sister. I waited. I don't know exactly when the idea came to me. Maybe it was a Sunday night, sitting on my second-hand couch, watching the ceiling and thinking about all the times I had reached out to my family and been met with nothing. The time I'd had a minor car accident and called my mother, and she'd spent most of the call telling me I should have taken her advice and bought a newer car. The time I'd been laid off briefly for about 6 weeks between jobs, and my brother had said with that smooth smile of his, "Well, hopefully this lights a fire under you." The time my sister had forgotten my birthday. Not late, not a belated text. Fully forgotten. And when I mentioned it 2 weeks later, had laughed and said, "You know I'm terrible with dates, don't take it personally." I thought about all of it, 3 decades of small moments, stacked up. And then I picked up the phone. I called my mother first. It was a Thursday evening, around 7:30. I made my voice sound smaller than it was. I told her I wasn't feeling well, that I'd been having chest pains, that I'd been to the doctor, and that they wanted me to come in for a follow-up scan, and I was scared, and I didn't have anyone to take me, and I was wondering if she could come. She paused for a moment. "When is it?" "Saturday morning," I told her. "Oh, honey." Another pause. "I can't do Saturday. Your uncle is visiting and there's a lot going on this weekend. Can't you just ask someone from work?" I told her I didn't want to bother anyone from work. "You'll be fine," she said. "It's probably nothing. You're 29, they're just being thorough." She changed the subject. We talked for 4 more minutes. When I hung up, I sat very still for a long time. I called my brother next. I told him the same thing. Chest pains, doctor's appointment, follow-up scan. I told him I was nervous and I just wanted someone with me. He told me he was slammed this weekend, he had showings back to back. It really wasn't a good time. He said his wife could maybe reach out, but honestly, I should really be talking to an actual doctor rather than worrying myself. He said, "You're probably fine, you always catastrophize." I had not catastrophized in our conversation. I had said I was scared. I said thank you. I hung up. I called my sister last. My sister, who I had driven 4 hours round trip to help move apartments 2 years ago. My sister, who I had lent $800 to once when she was between paychecks, money she had never mentioned returning. My sister, who I had shown up for, quietly, consistently, for 31 years. She didn't answer. She texted me back 40 minutes later. "Hey! Saw you called, crazy night over here, lub, everything okay?" I texted back and explained the same thing. Chest pains, Saturday morning, scared, didn't want to go alone. She sent me a string of emojis. A heart. A face with the wide eyes. Then, "Oh no. I'm sure it's nothing though. You should try one of those apps where someone drives you. I can call you after?" I put my phone face down on the coffee table. I sat there for a while. Then I called Petra. I want to explain who Petra was at that point in my life, so you understand what happened next. Petra was 36, had moved to Columbus from Pittsburgh about 2 years before I met her. She was the kind of person who remembered things, not just birthdays but details. The name of your dentist. The thing you'd mentioned being stressed about 6 weeks ago. She made coffee for both of us every morning without being asked, because she'd noticed I always forgot to make my own before 9 a.m. She'd driven me home once when my Civic was in the shop and hadn't made a thing of it. Just offered, drove, talked about a podcast she was listening to, and that was that. She was not a close friend exactly. We had lunch together often. We had never spent time together outside of work. But she was kind in a way that felt reliable. A rare thing, I had learned. I called her. I explained the same situation, maybe not quite as dire sounding as I'd made it for my family. I told her I had a medical appointment Saturday and I was a little anxious and didn't want to go alone. And I knew it was a lot to ask. She said, "Of course, what time do you need me?" Just like that. What time do you need me? Not "I'll try." Not "let me check." Not "can't you ask someone else?" Saturday morning she showed up at my apartment at 8:15 with 2 coffees and a breakfast sandwich she'd picked up on the way because, she said, "I figured you wouldn't eat before something stressful." She sat with me for 2 hours. We talked about everything and nothing. I was not actually sick. There was no scan, no appointment. But I sat next to her in my own living room and I let myself feel the full weight of what I'd learned that week. Not about the money. About the people. When she left, she hugged me at the door and said, "You let me know how it goes, okay? I'm here." I closed the door and leaned against it for a long moment. Then I went back to the attorney. Here's what the next several months looked like. From the outside, nothing. I went to work. I brought my lunch. I drove my dented Civic. I called my mother occasionally and listened to her talk. I saw my brother at a family dinner in April and he told me about a golf trip he was planning. Internally, everything was moving. The money cleared in March. I paid off my student loans, all of them, gone, in one transfer, and I sat and stared at the zero balance for probably 10 minutes. I set aside a substantial amount in a trust my attorney helped me structure. I invested conservatively, following advice from a financial planner she recommended. A quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who seemed genuinely unbothered by wealth in a way I found reassuring. I kept my apartment. I kept my job for now, not because I had to, but because I wasn't ready to make any visible changes. I needed to think. I thought about Petra. She had mentioned, over lunches and coffee conversations across many months, that she was trying to save enough to take a ceramics class, a real one, not a one-off evening workshop, but an actual semester-long course at the art center downtown. She'd mentioned that her car needed work she kept putting off. She'd mentioned carefully that her landlord had raised her rent and she was trying to figure out if she should move or take on a weekend job. None of these things were complaints. That was the thing about Petra. She stated them as facts and moved on. She didn't perform struggle for sympathy. She just had a life that was tighter than it should have been. For someone who worked as hard as she did. In May, I told her I had something to tell her, and I took her to lunch at a nicer restaurant than we usually went to. Not extravagant, but a step up, a place with cloth napkins and a wine list. And I told her. I watched her face while I explained. She went through several expressions in rapid succession: disbelief, confusion. And then, when I got to the part about calling my family and calling her, and what each of them had said, her eyes went very quiet and still, and she reached across the table and took my hand. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I'm really glad you called me." I told her I was glad I called her too. I told her I wanted to give her something. Not charity. I was careful with my words here because Petra was proud in the best way, and I knew I had to get this right. I said that she had been one of the most consistently kind people in my adult life, and that kindness had mattered to me more than she knew, and that I wanted to do something that felt right, not performative. I had thought about it for weeks. I paid off the remaining balance on her car, $1,200. I know it sounds small in the context of everything else, but to Petra it was significant, and to me it was the most natural starting point. I also wrote a check for the ceramics course, and the next level one after it, and the next. I told her she could use it however she wanted. I just wanted her to have it. She cried. Not dramatically. Petra didn't do anything dramatically. She got a little wet-eyed and pressed her lips together and looked out the window for a moment. Then she turned back and said, "You didn't have to do this." I told her I knew that. She said, "Thank you." That was all. It was the right amount. A few weeks later, she started the ceramics class. She texted me photos sometimes, lopsided bowls, a mug with a slightly uneven handle. They were wonderful. She was genuinely terrible at ceramics for about 6 weeks, and then she got a little better, and I saved every single photo. Now, my family. This part is harder to write, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. In June, my mother came to visit for a long weekend. By this point, I had quietly moved into a new apartment, nicer, still modest looking from the outside, in a neighborhood she wouldn't know well, and I had a new car. Also modest, because I wasn't interested in spectacle. She came for 3 days. We had dinners. We walked around a farmer's market. We were pleasant to each other. On the last evening, sitting at my kitchen table with wine, she asked me how I was really doing. It was one of those questions that people ask when they're in a generous mood, not necessarily expecting a real answer. I gave her one. I told her I'd been doing some thinking about our family, about what we were to each other. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear that I went into this conversation without anger. Anger would have made it about me. I wanted it to be honest. I told her about the phone call in March. I didn't reveal why I'd made it, not then. I just told her I had called her when I was scared and that she had not been able to come. I told her it had been a pattern I'd noticed for a long time and that I didn't blame her, but that I had made some decisions about where I was putting my energy going forward. She looked uncomfortable. She said she hadn't realized. She said she'd been overwhelmed. She said, and this part I've thought about many times since. I always just assumed you were fine. You're so capable. I told her that being capable did not mean not needing people. She didn't argue. That surprised me. She looked at the table and nodded slowly. We didn't fix everything that evening. You don't fix decades in one conversation over a kitchen table. But something shifted. She started calling differently after that. Still awkward sometimes, still herself, but listening more. Trying. I don't know if that's enough. I'm still figuring it out. My brother was harder. I called him in July. I told him by then I'd decided to tell my family about the inheritance, partly because my attorney advised some transparency around family relationships for legal reasons, and partly because I was tired of the secret. I told him matter-of-factly, I had inherited a significant amount of money from Great-Aunt Vera. I was in a stable and good place. I wanted him to know. The first thing he asked was how much. The second thing he asked was how much. The second thing he asked was whether I'd spoken to a financial advisor. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't ask how I was feeling about it. He launched almost immediately into a suggestion, framed as an opportunity, the way he framed everything, about a development project a colleague of his was looking for investors for. He said my timing was actually perfect. He said he could make some introductions. I told him I had everything handled. He kept going. I said it clearly, I'm not interested in investing with anyone in the family circle. My finances are separate. There was a pause. Then he said in a slightly cooler voice, of course. I'm just trying to help. I told him I knew that. He changed the subject. We talked for a few more minutes and then said goodbye. He hasn't brought it up again. We are still polite. We are, I think, exactly as close as we actually are. Which is not very close at all. I have made my peace with that. My sister called me the day after I told my brother, which meant he'd told her within 24 hours, which told me everything I needed to know about the texture of that relationship. She was warm on the phone. Excited, almost. She said, I can't believe it, Vera. I didn't even know she had that kind of money. She asked how I was feeling. She asked what I was planning to do with it. She said we should get together soon, really soon. She'd been meaning to call. I was kind. I am still her sister. But I was also paying attention. We got dinner 2 weeks later and she brought up, over dessert, that she and her boyfriend were looking at houses and the market was just so brutal right now. And she laughed a little when she said it and looked at me. I looked back. I said the market really was brutal, wasn't it? She laughed again, smaller. We talked about something else. She did not ask me to help her. Maybe she heard something in my voice. Maybe she thought better of it. Or maybe, and I like to believe this, she looked at me across the table and saw, for the first time, someone who was not available to fill whatever gap needed filling. Someone who had a life that was finished and solid and her own. I paid for dinner. That felt right. I always pay for things that feel right, now. I don't perform generosity and I don't withhold it. I just try to let it be a reflection of what's actually true. What's actually true right now? Almost a year later. I left my job in September. Not dramatically. I gave full notice, stayed through my transition period, wrote recommendations for the 2 junior staff I'd been mentoring. On my last day, Petra brought cupcakes and we ate them in the break room with a few other colleagues, and it was genuinely nice. Not a big production, just nice. Petra and I have lunch every other week. She finished her 2nd ceramics semester and is now, somehow, making bowls that people actually want to own. She sold 3 of them at a local market in October and texted me a photo, the little handwritten price tags. I still have that photo. I started my own small financial consulting practice, working with individuals and small nonprofits. I don't need it to be large. I don't need it to be impressive. I need it to be impressive. I need it to be mine. I moved into a house, a real one, with a small backyard that I'm still figuring out what to do with. My mother came to see it and walked through every room twice and said quietly, "It's really lovely." She sounded proud, I think. I don't know if I've fully forgiven her for the years of small diminishments, but I think forgiveness might not be a single moment. Maybe it's just the accumulation of new moments that are better than the old ones. I think about Great Aunt Vera sometimes. I think about what it means to be watched from a distance by someone who believes in you more than the people who are supposed to. I think about what she wrote in that note. I hope the money gives you room to breathe. I breathe differently now. Not because of the money. Or not only because of the money. Because I know now, with the specific, unambiguous certainty that only a real test can give you, exactly who shows up. I know the difference between the people who were always, quietly, choosing me, and the people who were simply comfortable with my proximity. I don't hate the ones who failed the test. I'm not interested in punishing them or cutting them off dramatically or making speeches. I've simply stopped trying to get water from stones. The people who show up, you take care of them. That's the whole lesson. That's what Vera knew and what I know now. You find the people who drive through something hard just to sit with you and you take care of them. You buy them the ceramics class. You eat lunch with them every other week. You save the photos of the lopsided bowls. You make a life out of those people. It's enough. Actually, it's more than enough. It's everything. I've thought a lot about what made Petra different, not lucky, not special in some untouchable way, just different in the way she moved through the world. She paid attention. That was the whole thing. She noticed when I forgot to make coffee. She remembered the small details I mentioned in passing and brought them back weeks later like they mattered. And they did matter. That was the point she understood, and my own family never quite grasped. The small things are the whole thing. How someone treats you on an ordinary Tuesday, when there's nothing to gain and no audience watching. That's the truest information you'll ever have about them. My brother is smart. My sister is warm, in her way. My mother loves me. I believe that. But none of them had built the habit of paying attention to me. And habits are what we actually are, underneath all the things we say about ourselves. My brother had the habit of turning conversations toward his own life. My sister had the habit of meaning to call. My mother had the habit of assuming I was fine because I had always managed to appear fine. These weren't cruelties, they were just patterns, worn into grooves over years. And by the time I was 29, those grooves were deep. What I've come to understand is that the people who show up are not showing up because of some extraordinary burst of character. They show up because showing up is already who they are. Petra didn't drive across town in the cold for me because I was special. She did it because that's what she does. That's who she had already decided to be, long before she knew me. The inheritance was irrelevant. The appointment wasn't real. None of the external circumstances mattered. What mattered was that when I needed someone, her answer was immediate and simple. Of course. What time do you need me? That sentence came from somewhere deep and practiced and true. And the ones who didn't come, their answers came from somewhere deep and practiced and true as well. That's the part that's hard to sit with. It means the pattern was always there. I just wasn't looking directly at it. Vera watched from a distance for years, and she saw something I could barely see in myself. That quiet, persistent capability, the showing up without fanfare, the driving 3 hours to a nursing home when no one else did. She recognized it because she had it too. She was a woman who had spent a lifetime paying attention to the right things and ignoring the noise. She gave me the money, yes. But more than that, she gave me confirmation. She said in her careful handwriting on a plain sheet of paper, "I see you. I always saw you." That's what I try to carry forward now. Not the money, not the apartment or the practice or the freedom, though those things are real and good. I try to carry the understanding that how we live in the small moments, how we treat the people who can do nothing for us, how we show up when it's inconvenient, how we remember the details that don't benefit us to remember. That is the actual shape of our character. And character, built over years of small choices, is the only thing that reliably creates a life worth living. I think about Petra's lopsided bowls. I think about the text photo of the handwritten price tags at the market. I think about what it means to finally stop pouring your energy into containers that have always had holes in them and to put it instead towards something that holds. You don't need a test and you don't need an inheritance to figure out who your people are. You already know. You've always known. The question is just whether you're ready to act on what you know.